Is Christian nationalism? Yesterday at the vigil, I told people we're going to do this, so I like to ask at these trainings, how many of you are opposed to Christian nationalism? How many of you feel like you could describe Christian nationalism to other people? Yeah, a lot less hands, right? It's difficult to know how to describe it. I remember when I was in college and I took a class on poetry. The professor said there's not one definition of what is a poem. Poems are an experience that you have. Some people really want to define a poem, and they lose the heart of poetry. Sometimes if we over-define things that matter, we can ruin our understanding of them. So we're going to try to help you understand what is Christian nationalism, not from a dictionary definitional point of view, but from the perspective of people who hold to Christian nationalism. So we're going to show you a lot of video clips of people who are Christian nationalists. We want you to hear from them. I'm going to do everything I can as one of the presenters today to not say anything that if my two friends who are Christian nationalists, I have two friends that I keep in my mind, I imagine one of them sitting there and one of them sitting right there, and in my mind's eye, I make sure that everything I say about Christian nationalism, if I looked over, they would nod and say, I agree, you've got us right. I don't think we need to characterize Christian nationalists. I don't think we need to put words in their mouths. I personally believe that what they're saying very clearly, and it is dangerous to democracy in this country. So we don't have to overstate. We don't have to embellish. We can let Christian nationalists speak for themselves and truly understand them. Then we're going to talk a bit about why is it attractive for people? Why do people hold these views? And we want you to leave here today with a deeper sense of understanding, the ability to empathize, and then to know how to respond as an individual or as an organization. So that's our goal. Our goal is not to freak you out, but you might get freaked out. Our goal is not to put fear in you. Our goal is to give you encouragement that love can overcome fear. So that's what we're hoping will come out of the day. So you're going to watch a lot of video. The reason we travel with this screen and projector and all this is because we really think that people being able to see on a screen like this and hear Christian nationalists speak is a really important part of what we're doing. I want to make a couple of opening statements. Christian nationalism is not about people exercising their faith in public. Now, I will hear from my Christian nationalist friends that really what you anti-Christian nationalist people are up to is you just want to silence Christians. We're not at all trying to tell people to be quiet about their faith in public. In fact, we travel with a group called Faithful America that wants to be more out saying things. We travel in a bus that says faith, hope, and love, supporting democracy for all. We travel around giving public speeches, standing on street corners, sometimes like we will today at this Franklin Graham event. We're being very public about our faith. Christian nationalism is not saying that Christians in America should be quiet. That's not what we're talking about. And if you don't yet know that that's going to be the pushback, if you raise the issue of Christian nationalism, I just want to encourage you to know that that's what's coming. If you were to say to a friend or a neighbor or a family member, hey, I was at this training about Christian nationalism, or I saw this film called God and Country, or I read this book called Jesus and John Wayne, or I read this book called Power Worshippers, any of that kind of stuff, you'll hear some of those people say back to you, oh, that's that liberal political movement trying to get Christians to not be public about their faith. That is the number one response from people who oppose those who are opposing Christian nationalism. So I want to make it perfectly clear that that's not what's going on. We do believe that Christian nationalism is about the government, state, local, federal governments, using its power to advocate for or derive its authority or grant privileges to Christians. Christian nationalism is not a Christian being Christian in the world. It's when the government decides that it's going to use its power to give preferential treatment to some religious groups, or believes that it derives its authority from its religious holdings. So this really has to do with how does the government utilize its power and on behalf of whom? So remember a while back, after marriage of same-sex people was legalized in the country, there was a person who was a clerk and her job was to sign marriage licenses. And she said, I can't do that because she was in a conflict. Her own personal faith conflicted with what she should do with her job. And she thought that her faith gave her more authority to decide what to do in her job. So she was in a conundrum, trying to figure out what to do. I think she took the Christian nationalist route. I think she thinks she took the Christian nationalist route too, by the way. But that's an example that we're talking about. Now, the reason this gets a little sticky is because we're also going to show you things about public opinion about Christian nationalism. What do people think? Do people think this is a Christian country? Do they think we're better off if everybody in this country is Christian? All kinds of things that people think about Christian nationalism, which can be the thoughts that people have in their head. And we're not traveling the country trying to be thought police. But those thoughts often translate into elected officials that translate into policies. And it's at that moment where elected officials and policies start to utilize the power from a particular understanding of the world to have real life impact on other people. So that's one of the things we're going to be talking about. We're also going to talk about the fact that we need to distinguish between a citizen's motivation to want the government to take its religion as the only religion that matters in America and the role that privileges Christianity. Okay? We're going to get done with black and white things here in a moment, but one of the assumptions of many streams of Christian nationalism is, and this is a quote, that America is anointed by God to convert the world to Christianity. By the way, if you think that the Christian nationalists in America right now, and I would suggest to you that it's a particular variant of Christian nationalism, sort of like how we have COVID viruses, which I'm suffering from one right now because I have the common cold, which some of us learned in 2020 is also a COVID virus, right? But COVID-19 was a particular variant of that COVID virus that was more deadly. We have always had Christian nationalism around in the United States. We'll talk a bunch about that. But we have a new variant of it in 2024 that's much more deadly. And that version is not just trying to save America, it's trying to Christianize the world. So it has a global view. You're going to hear a lot of things said by people on the screen here today that only make sense if you understand the vision they have is for not just the United States of America to be a Christian nation, but for every nation to be a Christian nation. It's the globalization and the Christianization of the globe. So, that America is anointed by God to convert the world to Christianity by force if necessary to seek to accelerate Jesus' return and rule over the earth. So in a lot of ways, these are theological ideas that are being put into practice in our faith and government. And that's why some people are taking over school boards. You're going to hear Michael Flynn talk about recruiting people to take over school boards all over America. It's because they're trying to raise up an army to come from the United States to Christianize the globe through the power of the federal and state governments. So that's what's going on with Christian nationalism. According to this view, the divine mission of God will be carried out when true believers seize control of the institutions of the United States government. If you've ever wondered why so many self-identified Christians support Donald Trump, it's not because of who he is, it's because of the people that he put in positions of power. To really understand why folks are behind him, you have to understand what he did in his cabinet, who the members of his cabinet were, who the all people who were believing that their role was to divinely be appointed to bring about the fulfillment of God's agenda to the world through seizing powers of the federal government. It's going to be a thing called the Seven Mountains theory, which we'll talk about in a bit, where you take over 7 areas of culture. And the government is one of those. So there's a very sophisticated understanding for people about why they're in this Christian nationalism thing. Okay, so that's going to be a little bit of framing, and we're going to ask you to listen to all of this with 2 things in mind: empathy and engagement. How can you deepen your sense of understanding and empathy, so you understand why people hold views that they hold, and what meaning do they have for them? So I'd like you to think about 3 questions that you can ask friends, families, and neighbors. What do you believe? It's a great question. It's good to ask people that and wait for the answer, even though sometimes we think we know. To also then ask them, why do you believe the thing you believe? Where did it come from? How did you get it? And I think most importantly, the 3rd question, what does that belief do for you? How does it function in your life? Our beliefs don't just exist in our head. They perform functions for us. They tell us who we are. They make sense of our lives. So there are things that people believe around Christian nationalism that give their life sense. And if we're going to provide an alternative to Christian nationalism at the governmental level and at the family and friend and societal level, we have to understand that the belief of Christian nationalism functions in people's lives in a particular way. Okay, all right, so we'll get into this. You're probably here because, like a lot of people, Christian nationalism is a new thing in the news to a lot of folks. How many of you were talking about Christian nationalism 5 years ago or longer ago? Yeah, and you're like, oh, we've been talking about this for a long time. People have been working on it. People have been writing books, churches, leaders, all kinds of stuff that people have been going at it. But it wasn't in the news, right? Something happened. Well, a lot of us know what happened. It was January 6th, right? This thing that was fueled and funded by Christian nationalists. The insurrection was fueled and funded by the motivations of Christian nationalists. And a number of people are now starting to talk about this because of the work of Faithful America, because of the works of Christians Against Christian Nationalism, because of works of a lot of spokespeople, our organization and others. We're out telling the press and telling others and holding meetings that we can describe what's going on. In other words, people aren't just getting sick. There is a particular virus in the democracy of America, and we can name it. And it's Christian Nationalism 2024 variant. All right, we're going to show you a little clip here from MSNBC. They did a special on Christian nationalism, and they were following a person who won a special election in South Texas. Now, South Texas, for a very long time, along the border, had been a place where people voted for Democrats. Then in a special election a couple of years ago, Mayra Flores won as a Republican. And not only as a Republican, as a MAGA Republican. But her MAGA wasn't just make America great again, it was make America godly again. And it was an intentional Christian nationalist outreach for which she won by mobilizing Hispanic and Spanish-speaking churches along the border. She since has had a full election and lost, so she won the full election. But while she was a congressperson, MSNBC did an interview, and I think it really starts to enlighten what's going on here. So that's what this clip is from.
Flores is running at a time when Republican candidates around the country have called for religion to play a greater role in government. Some of them calling for an end to the separation of church and state. Some of them calling for the U.S. to become an explicitly Christian nation.
We need to be the party of nationalism, and I'm a Christian and I say it proudly. We should be Christian nationalists.
The church is supposed to direct the government. The government is not supposed to direct the church. And I'm tired of this separation of church and state junk that's not in the Constitution. It was in a stinking letter, and it means nothing like what they say it does.
We asked Congresswoman Flores for her view of government and religion.
Do you think there should be a separation between church and state?
Well, I believe that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. But I do think that the church does have the right to get involved in the government and letting us know, because again, I believe that the church knows the people better than the government. And that is a fact. But I agree that the government has no business, getting involved with the church. There has to be a separation.
Train of thought, do you support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country?
Yeah, I do. I believe that we should always put God first.
Okay, so what you see there in Mayra Flores' response is something that a lot of people experience, which is this initial question of, do you think we should be a Christian nationalist country? And then maybe you heard her response. Yes, I think we should put God first. So there's often this confusion or this turning of a question. For her, the only way that the country could follow God, I don't think I'm overspeaking for her. I think what she's trying to say is the only way that people could really put God first is to be Christian. So we should do that in this country. We should put God first. Therefore, the only means of that is to be Christian. I've heard that from a lot of Christian nationalists. So here she is, an elected official, saying something like, yes, we need to be sure that we put God first. Now, I'm going to show you a clip of a person, not at the federal level, but at the county level in Ottawa County, Michigan. This is West Michigan. Anybody formerly from West Michigan? Well, yeah, welcome home. Okay, West Michigan folks. We do a lot of work in West Michigan, and there's been a hardcore takeover of county government in West Michigan by Christian nationalists. So the clip that you're about to see is from one of the people who is being recalled for some things that she was doing not related to this, but she was calling it Christian persecution that she's being recalled. So she had a press conference talking about her role on the county commission, which is like the people that lead the county, and she led this chant in Ottawa County.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Again.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
One more time.
Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County.
Number 2. I speak life to Ottawa County.
I speak life to Ottawa County. I speak life to Ottawa County. I speak life to Ottawa County.
So what you have going on here is a person in her professional capacity at a press conference about her role, leading a chant that should fit inside of a faith community. And look, if a faith community wants to get together and say Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County, they should get to say Jesus is Lord over Ottawa County, right? We have the freedom to express religion however we want. Do you have the freedom to express that when you're in your position as somebody on the county commission? That's where we have to answer that question in this country. I would say no. I think that is not the place for her to make personal professions of faith from that standpoint of a person who's elected to her county commission. So this is going on all over the country, and for so many people, it is so closely tied together. Someone's own personal faith and the role of the government. We're going to talk a bit about this confusion that happens between the we the people in the Bill of Rights and the church's understanding that we're not institutions, that we're people, and it all becomes the same people. So we'll talk about that in a bit. It's partly why some people really struggle with the answer to the question, should we be Christian nationalists? But this also is not happening by accident. We're going to show you now a clip of a person that helped to organize Mayra Flores. So Mayra Flores didn't just pop up and say, I'm going to run a Make America Godly Again campaign. It was actually put together by a group that traveled the country and recruits people, and you're going to hear what they have to say about the role of Christian nationalism and why they're up to it.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Bienvenido's Faith Assembly team? How do you all organize?
In 2019, we realized that to better engage and mobilize Latino voters and to expose the message of conservative policy, the best way to do it was through the churches, because 8 out of 10 times, if a Latino is being outreached through the church, more than likely they believe in some of the conservative platforms, so it's much easier for them to get out and vote Republican.
The Congresswoman started and ended her campaign in the church. How effective was that?
The most effective.
Yeah.
Mayra Flores were able to bring that message to South Texas and say, listen, no more church lockdowns, no more harassment and attacks on the church. Get out and vote for someone that will protect religious liberty. And that's why over, I think, 75, a coalition of over plus 75 churches came together and said, we are supporting Mayra Flores through our congregation, letting them know who is running for office.
Is that a new strategy? I mean, is it a new strategy to sort of deploy churches and pastors?
The Democrat Party has been doing that with black churches for years and years and years. And it took outside organizations like Bienvenido to come in and tell churches, hey, it is your right to be involved. So if Republicans don't start strategizing with Latino pastors and churches like the Democrats have done for years with the black church, there will be no victory for conservative candidates across the country.
God, family, and country. Why do you think those 3 words resonated so much?
It is,
with Latinos specifically.
It is the heartbeat of the Latino community. You can't have moral values without having faith in something, faith in having, understanding that God is, your rights come from God and God only, right? So tying those things into
That's a dangerous thing to say, that your rights come from God and God only. What do you mean by that?
Absolutely not. Are you kidding me? Well, I would rather say that my rights come from God than rights come from government. Government can take away my rights. I mean, in the Constitution, we have unalienable rights that come from our Creator, being that we have the opportunity of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That only comes from you understanding that there is a moral conscience, right? And for Latinos, that means believing that our rights come from, our God-given rights come from God and not government. And I think that Congresswoman Mayra Flores was able to make that a political campaign.
When I talked to the Congresswoman, she even said that she would support the United States becoming a Christian nationalist country. Mm-hmm. Those are her words. Mm-hmm. Do you support something like
100%.
that?
100%.
So what you see here are people that are very blatant about If we don't do this kind of outreach inside of these communities, then conservative politics doesn't have a future in America. To be clear, Christian nationalism is a political movement seeking power. That's what it exists for. That's why it's funded. That's what it's doing. Part of the reason that we're going to go as an organization, along with Faithful America and a bunch of you, to go talk to the Franklin Graham attendees today is because the Franklin Graham tour is doing border town tours, speaking what I would call slanderous lies about the border and about migrants and about people on both sides of the border. And they're doing it specifically as a way to recruit people for Republican political motivations. That's what is going on. Now, they're not hiding it. Right? You don't have to sneak around and try to figure it out. It is the mission statement of these kinds of organizations, and they say it proudly. If we don't do outreach to the Latino community around these issues, conservatives don't have a chance to win in the future of America. So it's a political strategy as much as it is religious impulse. Now, does that mean that every person who holds Christian nationalist views or stands behind a county commissioner and chants Jesus is the Lord of Ottawa County is thinking about this from political terms? No, of course not. They're being utilized to fulfill political terms by a very sophisticated group of people who are organizing. And I will say most Americans reject Christian nationalism. Most Christians reject Christian nationalism. But the Christian nationalists are better organized and better deployed and better messengers. So if you're taking stock on which one is going to be spread around the country faster, I think you're going to go with that adage that blessed are the organized, right? And so a lot of us feel like we have to spend our time being organized as well. Okay, a little trigger warning here. I'm going to show you a video clip of Jeff Sessions. Jeff Sessions used to be the Attorney General of the United States. So if you've tried to not listen to Jeff Sessions or Donald Trump or all the rest, we don't even have any Donald Trump in this. We take a break from that for all of this because we do a lot of things to try to help people not pay attention to Donald Trump and vote for him. But you won't get any of that. But you will get a little Jeff Sessions here. Jeff Sessions was the Attorney General of the United States. He walked up to a podium in his position as the Attorney General of the United States in order to explain why the United States policy was going to be to separate children from their parents at the United States-Mexico border as a deterrent. And in launching into the explanation of that, he gives this rationale.
I would cite you to the Apostle Paul and his clear and wise command in Romans 13 to obey the laws of the government because God has ordained the government for his purposes. Orderly and lawful processes are good in themselves. Consistent, fair application of law is in itself a good and moral thing, and that protects the weak. It protects the lawful. Our policies that can result in short-term separation of families is not unusual or unjustified.
All right, I just couldn't let him go any longer, but we could spend the rest of the afternoon having to unwind all of that. No, following the laws, Attorney General, would be great. It's not what we're doing at our border. In fact, we're violating the laws of asylum seekers and the rest, as many of you know so much better than we do. But when he begins his statement with, I want to commend to you the Apostle Paul from the book of Romans. Now, at the time when he was the Attorney General, my congressperson was Ilhan Omar. Ilhan Omar was a great congressperson. I got districted out of her districts. That's why she's not my congressperson today. A Muslim woman. But I don't want Ilhan Omar stepping up and telling me that the reason she's advocating for a law is because of what the Quran says, and I don't want Jeff Sessions using the book of Romans as the rationale for why they're going to invoke any law. Now, sometimes, let's editorialize for a moment, sometimes there's Christian liberals who want to say, just pick the right parts of the Bible for us to advocate for. Like caring for your neighbor and loving for the least of these and welcoming the stranger. Now that should be motivations for all of us who hold to those faiths, 100%. That should motivate us. That should not be the rationale for why we set the laws that we set. So when you see Christian nationalism like this, now I will tell you, if you felt yourself uncomfortable, anybody feel uncomfortable just hearing Jeff Sessions say those things? Just know that there are rooms full of other people who, when they hear him saying that, they say, finally, we have godly leadership in America. This is why there's this level of support when you're just racking your brain. Why would they support that guy? Because he brings people like this to say nonsense like this. It has to be called out each and every time, whenever it's possible, for this kind of thing to happen. Okay, let's take a little break. We've been talking at you for a long time. I'm just going to give you about 30 seconds to just breathe here. Okay, just sort of let it go. If some of you are into meditation, you know what to do. You sit up straight, you put your feet on the ground. If some of you are into yoga, you might strike a yoga prayer, a breath. If some of you are like, actually, my bladder's been talking to me longer than you have, and I need to get up and go to the bathroom. We're not going to take a formal break, but we're just going to give it a minute for you to sort of do whatever in your body after hearing all of that stuff needs to do. And I see a hand up here, yes. Yeah, we'll talk about that later, because I'll just tell you our answer. Nathan can tell you why they do it at Faithful America. We don't challenge anyone's claim of Christianity. I mean, look, I've been called a heretic by everybody from family members to strangers, so I get it. They tell me that I'm not Christian. I just don't think it works to spend our time then having an argument about what makes somebody a Christian or not. That's the only reason why we don't do it. Okay, here we go again. We're back at it here. All right, we're going to introduce to you Amanda Tyler. Amanda Tyler is a person who leads a group called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. And as you can see on here, she's also a part of the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty. If you're not familiar with the Baptist Joint Committee for Religious Liberty, you might hear words like Baptist and religious liberty and think, oh, the Southern Baptist Liberty University, that crowd? No, these are the American Baptists. They are not that thing at all. I was doing this little spiel one time. We were in Indiana or Ohio, and I was saying this to somebody, and they said, this is an American Baptist church, so we got to get that. So I was mansplaining American Baptist to the American Baptists because they didn't have it in their church title. But the American Baptists are not the Southern Baptists. And what this group has been advocating for a long time is separation of church and state as a staple of what we're doing in America. And Amanda is a lawyer, and their group started an effort called Christians Against Christian Nationalism. So they're claiming the name Christian, and they're speaking out against Christian nationalism. They're great partners of Faithful America and Vote Common Good. We're all in this work together. If you want to go to their website and sign up, I would highly encourage you to do it. If you sign up for our Vote Common Good email, which we hope we do, we'll send you a response from this gathering here with links to all of those, so you can go to Vote Common Good on your phone or whatever and sign up on the email list, and we'll keep you in touch with Amanda. But here's Amanda. What you're going to see here, and you'll see a couple of these clips in our presentation, is a webinar that we did with Amanda and a whole number of other presenters right after the January 6th insurrection, when we saw all the Christian nationalism that was supporting and behind that, including the men who were in the dais, the Senate dais and other places, in praying in Jesus' name, thanking God for them to lead the insurrection. So we put together a fast response, which then has led to this curriculum. So this is Amanda Tyler. That's why you're going to see the video the way that it is. And everything you're going to see here is available for you in another curriculum format. But this is Amanda Tyler.
I think that's really a vital point, because we should have a common understanding about what we're talking about as far as Christian nationalism goes. And I'm going to point to the statement that's available at christiansagainstchristiannationalism.org. You know, the work that we did back in 2019 was about providing an advocacy platform for people who were interested in learning more and for taking a public stand. And the centerpiece of the project is a statement. And in the statement itself, we define Christian nationalism as a political ideology that seeks to merge our identities as Americans and Christians. So a few things here. You know, one, we are specifically talking in the American context. This is something that comes up. This is not particular to the United States, but in our work, we are really focusing on the American expression of Christian nationalism. And so we talk explicitly about American and Christian identities. But we also want to distinguish that Christian nationalism is not Christianity. Christian nationalism is a political ideology. Christianity is a religion. That said, you can't totally divorce Christianity out of it. It'd be great just to say, oh, this has nothing to do with Christianity. Yeah. That would be really easy, right? That's not accurate. And that's because Christian nationalism uses the narratives and the symbols and in some cases, even the theology of Christianity to further this political ideology. But as we define Christian nationalism, it is not itself a religion. It is more about identity than religion in a lot of ways. And we get at this in one of our resources that we have available at Christians Against Christian Nationalism, a really handy one-pager that your guests last week, Andrew Whitehead and Samuel Perry, helped us put together called What is Christian Nationalism? And we talk about how it's more identity than religion. When we define Christian nationalism, I think it's also important to say what it's not. It's not patriotism. Patriotism is a love of country, and we can show our love of country in a number of different ways. We can wave an American flag, we can protest in the streets, we can exercise our constitutional rights, right? These are all different ways to be patriotic. Nationalism is a love of country that also requires an allegiance to it above everything else, including our theological views. And so when our theological view, when our patriotism starts to ask us to sacrifice our theological views, that's no longer patriotism, that's nationalism. And particularly as we're talking about here, Christian nationalism.
Amanda is an excellent communicator. She travels the country doing this. We just couldn't commend more you following up with Americans or Christians Against Christian Nationalism and the other work that they do. She mentioned these people, Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead. They wrote a book called Taking America Back for God. It's a critique of that movement. It's not a call to do that, just in case you're wondering. Sometimes a book title doesn't tell you everything you need to know. But they're sociologists who've done big surveys on Christian, on Americans' views toward Christian nationalism. So they were part of our webinar series as well. And you're not supposed to be able to read any of this. I just want to show you that this is like what sociologists do, right? So this is the kind of thing that they put out. If you want to look at this, it's on our website and lots of other places you can find their material. But they're asking people a number of questions, like cities should be allowed to use religious symbols on public property, or the US Constitution was inspired by God and reflects a vision for America. These kinds of scales, and then people place themselves on a scale with a numerical value, right? So I just bring all that up because this is one of the things that they're going to talk about. Then they're going to talk about the scale that they've created out of all of those surveys. And on one side, they have ambassadors of Christian nationalism, people who hold strongly to Christian nationalist views, all the way over to rejectors of Christian nationalism. So depending on how you answered questions, you got a point value, and those point values then translate to this scale from 0 up to 24. Now, if you want to take that test, you can go onto our website, and we have this actual same test there, and you can take it for yourself or give it to a friend. So if you know, that old Jeff Foxworthy thing, you might be a Christian nationalist if, so you can take the test on there if somebody wants to go on there and take that test for themselves and see where they end up. My guess is most of you are going to end up as rejectors. But this is Sam Perry and Andrew Whitehead. And Stephanie and Christy and I were the hosts of this series over multiple weeks with a number of different guests. And again, the full length of these interviews, hour-long interviews with each of these partners are on the website, and it's part of the curriculum that you can use for churches or small groups or some of the rest of it. It's all been edited for that purpose. But this is super helpful with Andrew and Sam.
If we're looking at immigration, if we're looking at refugees, if we're looking at religious minorities, we're looking at all these different important hot-button issues. Christian nationalism consistently matters over and above whether you're Republican or Democrat, whether you are an evangelical or a mainline Protestant or unaffiliated, whether you attend church a lot or you believe the Bible should be read literally. When we account for all those things, Christian nationalism is still consistently one of the most important predictors. So what that tells us is that this is a key lens through which Americans view their social worlds. Whether they embrace it or reject it, it is doing work in how people are interacting with their world. The second thing we find is that Christian nationalism is not only really important, but it's an actual thing. And I just use kind of this, non-sociological language here, because it isn't just racism, it isn't just conservative politics, it isn't just authoritarianism, but that it is something different. It's its own thing, and so we're studying that. And then our final kind of main finding is that Christian nationalism does not necessarily equal being religious or being evangelical or, being a faithful Christian. Because we find that those that reject Christian nationalism but maybe attend an evangelical Protestant church, they look completely different from fellow evangelicals who might embrace Christian nationalism really strongly. And so this is something that cuts across religious traditions. So if you're a white Catholic or a white mainline Protestant who embraces Christian nationalism, the likelihood that you really support the insurrectionists is equally high to white evangelicals, what we're finding. And so this is something that really operates across religious traditions. And so those are some of the key kind of points we make in the book. But Sam's been collecting some amazing data lately. And so, yeah, Sam, I'll let you share just a little bit of that.
Yeah, I mean, just to finish off the discussion of the book, though, I think the way the book progresses is we describe how really Christian nationalism worships at the holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order. It values three things primarily: power and making sure that our group stays in power and is able to maintain that power. We demonstrate that in the book through its Christian nationalist support of Donald Trump and his policies and his brand of politics. And we've been able to demonstrate that in subsequent studies as well. That Christian nationalism, and especially white Christian nationalism, is very concerned with maintaining proper boundaries between us and them. And that's really one of the things that Christian nationalism boils down to, is marking off who is the us that has the rightful power in the United States and who is the them that we oppose and want to make sure that we marginalize or oppress or drive out. And then the last one is order. Christian nationalism at its core longs to establish and reinforce a very particular traditionalist social order in which everybody recognizes their proper place in the family, in society, in the church. And so it manifests in a variety of ways, but really that's kind of the breakdown of the book, is how Christian nationalism reinforces and worships at that holy trinity of power, boundaries, and order.
Such good material. There's so much more. We sort of wish we could let you watch all of it. So anyway, you can head over to our little website that says "How Christian Nationalist Am I?" if you wanted to, and you could take those. Those tests. All right. So I've tried to give you, as best I could, sort of a vision here of what Christian nationalists are up to. It's globalization. They're trying to figure out their place in the world, how they're the ones that are in charge. They feel a lot of responsibility for all of this. Most Christian nationalists don't identify as a Christian nationalist. It's not a self-defining term. I live in Minneapolis. I really don't walk around referring to myself as a Midwesterner. The only time I refer to myself as a Midwesterner is if I'm on the West Coast or I'm down in southern Florida and somebody says, "Where are you from?" I say, "Oh, I'm from the Midwest." And then they say, "Oh yeah, where?" And they say, "Minnesota." And they say, "Oh yeah, where?" And then I say, "Well, the Minneapolis." And they say, "Oh yeah, where?" Right? And then I keep getting more and more specific until I tell them I live at 6301 Peacedale Avenue, Edina, Minnesota, 55424, right? We can get all the way down to that level. But that general category of a Midwesterner is not how I see myself. But I am one by the definition of somebody who lives in the Midwest of the United States, even though it's not a self-defining term. That's how language works. So a lot of the struggle we have in talking about this, and you may be having it with family and friends, is if someone doesn't self-identify with the term Christian nationalists, it's hard to talk about it with them. So one of the things we have to do is to understand what are the motivations of Christian nationalism so we can talk with people about the motivations that they hold and not the title. Because if you're ever in a discussion with someone about why the title you want to give them doesn't fit them, the conversation is not going very well, right? But you can talk about what they actually believe and why it's important to them. So this next section of our time is designed to help you understand what is attractive about Christian nationalism to people, to increase your empathy of understanding so that you have more things to talk about more specifically rather than using titles and phrases and assigning labels to one another. So the degree to which it works, like, look, it works for us to say we're going to have a session on confronting Christian nationalism. People are like, oh, that's a topic I'm interested in. Right? It works for those purposes, but it doesn't work to tell someone who doesn't self-identify as a Christian nationalist that you are one, because it doesn't feel right to them. But you can start to ask them a whole bunch of other questions, like, what do you think about this, or what do you think about that? And then all of a sudden, the understanding of being a Christian nationalist comes to them. All right. So there are 5. I'm not going to give all of them fair time here because they don't all need it. Some of them I'll just give a sentence or two, and others we'll spend a little bit of time on. Here are basically the 5. The belief that the country was started as a Christian nation is what makes us a Christian nation. A lot of people love a good origin story, and you can have fights galore about whether we started as a Christian nation. And both sides can end up right on this one, by the way. If you start the nation with the Puritans, we got ourselves a Christian nation. If you start the nation with the founding of the Constitution and the Declaration of a series of United States, where they have set aside religious demands, they intentionally said no to religious requirements for participation. They intentionally looked at the Protestant movement and rejected it and started a secular society, then absolutely not was this founded as a Christian nation. So one of the questions you end up with right out of the chutes with the founding and origin stories pieces, what part of the beginning of America are we talking about? 1492, 1643, 1776, 1812? When did America start? Okay, but it's a big deal for a lot of people. A lot of people feel like the question of you started as a Christian nation is a big one. This church and people confusion is a really big one for your populist person. I mentioned it earlier. I've been a pastor for my entire adult life. I've spent my time saying to people, the churches are not our institutions or organizations. The church is the people. The government is not just institutions and policies. It is a government of, and they're the same people. You see where people get confused? They don't know. We have not helped people on the civic side or the religious side to navigate their role as people in our society to help understand how we're supposed to make the distinction between the we the people of the declarations and the we the people of the faith communities. And so for some people, they're like, when am I supposed to stop being Christian? How would I ever stop being Christian? Right? And so a lot of people, when they hear you say, don't be a Christian nationalist, they think, don't be Christian in public. So one of the things we're going to say at the end here, and I'll just cheat it a little bit early because, like being told someone loves you, it doesn't hurt to hear that a couple times a day. So it doesn't hurt to hear a couple times a day. Churches, we could figure out how to spend more time helping people understand our role in society. We could actually perform civic duty by helping people understand how to engage in our society around this question of who are we and what does it mean to be a democracy that's a people movement and a religion that's a people movement when it involves some of the same people. Okay, so there's some work that we could do around this. But a lot of people hold to Christian nationalism because they think it started as a Christian nation and it's all the same people. For lots of folks, that's it. They barely go any further. The next is, there's this whole theological movement that uses the United States of America as the new Israel. Now, I know some of you have never heard that. You've heard people talk about the church as the new Israel, that what's talked about for the nation of Israel in the Jewish text is then applied to the church. Well, these folks are applying it not to the church, but to the United States of America. So they'll often take Jewish texts. You'll hear them very regularly taking Jewish texts and using those texts to apply to America. If my people who are called by my name will pray and humble themselves, we will heal the land. 2 Chronicles, right? Who are they talking about? Not the church, not the nation of Israel, the United States of America. Sometimes progressives do the same thing. They pluck a passage from the Old Testament, or as I call it, or the Bible as my rabbi calls it, and they apply that to the United States of America and how we should treat the foreigner. So this becomes a thing we have to figure out how to do when we're going to take our scriptures and our texts. To whom are they now applying? The nation, the faith community, the individual, the set of individuals? For whom are we doing this? There's some deep theological work to do here. We've tended not to give a lot of investment in progressive spaces on this one. The conservatives have given a lot of thought on this, and I think incorrectly, and are leading people to all kinds of conclusions that are not very good. So you will hear, and you'll see on video clips here, people talking about the books of prophets and the books of the Jewish text as it applying to the United States of America. Very common thing. That goes along with a holy war narrative of good versus evil. You're going to get a lot of that. Who are the good guys? Who are the bad guys? The Christians are the good guys. Non-Christians are the bad guys, and God's on the side of the good guys. It's a big one. And then finally, the role of the United States in the 7 mountains of anointing leaders to fulfill God's agenda for the world. So these tend to be the 5, and some people have 1 or 2 of them. Some people have 3 or 4. Some people used to hold the 1 or moving around, but they tend to find their way. All right, so rather than me tell you what they're saying, we'll show you one. This is the pastor who was the pastor behind Myra Flores. And these folks are just so clear about what they're up to. And here's that Christian nationalist thing sort of all bundled together in one great little package for you.
You know that Thomas Jefferson said that you couldn't even call yourself a Christian, an American, if you weren't a God-fearing Christian. And we're going to proclaim that this nation belongs to you, God. Like it was founded in 1776, Lord. Lord, we pray for the supremacy of God in this nation again.
How involved do you think someone like you should actually be in politics and in guiding policy?
Oh, I think we need to. I mean, we like I said, this nation was founded under God, and so we've gone away from that. The church has.
But the nation, in the Constitution and in the Declaration of Independence, it doesn't give any partiality to Christianity. In fact, the opposite, right? And how do you reconcile those two things?
There's freedom of religion, but at the same time, they understood that this whole foundation was built on the Word of God. If we understood, they don't want to force it on you, but they understood, okay, this Constitution will be built. They used 27 scriptures to form the Constitution.
But Thomas Jefferson, who you quoted on stage to your audience, he's very much the one that believed in the separation between church and state. So again,
But you know what? It's funny because that separation of church always comes up. But it was never a law, and that's the thing. Like as a pastor, I just want to to tell pastors it's okay to talk about politics in your church. You won't get in trouble. Thank you, Jesus.
In Cabrera's view, Myra Flores is the beginning of something much bigger.
Thank you, Jesus. And devil, we're going to kick you out. Kick you out of our cities, kick you out of our states, and kick you out of this nation, and kick you out of that White House in the name of Jesus.
When you say something like the states belong to Judah or the states belong to Christianity, is that not dangerous?
How am I being a danger to society if I'm preaching what the Bible teaches and all we want to do is
politicians are elected to serve the people, right? To serve everybody, not to serve a God.
Yeah, but hold on, but we are electing them. So they're representing us.
And there's also Muslims that elect them. And
exactly.
I mean,
so that's what I'm saying. So now as a voice, as a church, we have a right to vote for whoever we want to vote for. So, but if we don't use that voice, then what's the point then? Then we're not doing our jobs as Christians to vote for people that have our values. When you're born again, like your mentality changes. I don't think like a Latino no more. I think like a man of God.
Are there any candidates that Make America Godly Again has endorsed?
Myra was just the beginning. It was just, she opened a door for other people to walk through.
I mean, you yourself were there during her inauguration.
Exactly.
And if I remember correctly, you told Speaker Pelosi that you wanted to take this country back for God.
That's right. And that was, let me tell you, if I died today, it was worth it.
From the United States Capitol.
All right, so there it is. It's sort of a classic example. You could sort of hear many of the elements in there, right? It's us as the people and all of it mixing together. This is the kind of thing that Christian nationalists are hearing all the time. People articulating, this is how the world makes sense. Here's how we understand it, even when there's pushback. All right, this little bit is one put together by the AP. It's from a show called Michael Flynn's Holy War. That one you just saw on Myra Flores, you can find that on the MSNBC website, the whole hour-long special. This one called Michael Flynn's Holy War was put up by a joint project of the AP and PBS, and it was on PBS, and there's just a couple of segments of it. Now, Michael Flynn's not from the Pentecostal charismatic side that you saw from the pastor there, but from the Catholic side, and there's a hardcore Catholic movement of Christian nationalism. Michael Flynn and Steve Bannon and some of the rest are all leading. And they're very anti-Catholic Church, or at least under this Pope, and a whole lot of other things. So they have a whole other kind of a movement, and they lead these these crusades around the country as well. And Nathan and I have attended some of these events and do counter-protesting and counter-messaging events at those things. And so you're going to see some of this. This is Michael Flynn. Sorry.
General Michael Flynn, ladies and gentlemen.
Michael Flynn's political influence has only grown since the January 6th insurrection.
Tomorrow, we the people are going to be here, and we want you to know that we will not stand for a lie.
General Flynn, do you believe in the peaceful transition of power in the United States of America?
Flynn has endorsed around 100 candidates for federal, state, and even local offices, raised millions, and helped launch the Reawaken America tour that mixes politics and religion.
I mean, there is a spiritual war and there is a political war. And they are going on. They're going on in this country right now. Since the November Virginia election across the country, we have overturned 200 school boards in this country. 200.
So Flynn is getting in front of audiences, and he's using Christian nationalist rhetoric to rally people who want to be fed that, because they want to be excited, mobilized.
They're going to shut our churches down, and they're going to tell you, you're going to get mandated to do this, you're going to get mandated to do that.
Christian nationalism threatens democracy because it is fundamentally anti-democratic by nature. It doesn't prioritize the incorporation or the participation of all Americans.
They say you're a Christian nationalist. Are you?
What is that? I'm an Irish Catholic.
We should skip that question. He is an Irish Catholic general who served
I'm a follower of Jesus. How's that?
33 years in the military serving this country.
So there it is. There's a holy war narrative. They're recruiting up a bunch of people for this big battle. And what is Christian nationalism? I don't even know what it would be. By the way, you've heard now 3 different references to church shutdowns. One of the circumstances that fueled this new variant of Christian nationalism, 2024, was response to the pandemic. When state and federal governments did not determine churches and other faith communities to be essential parts of society, a lot of people read into that your bar can stay open, Delta Airlines and Home Depot, but not a faith community. And for a lot of people, that fueled them conspiracy theories and a whole lot of others. And frankly, a lot of people who are making those decisions regret the decisions they made. And they feel like, hey, maybe we should have allowed for more spaces and places. But no, we don't talk about that, right? We don't talk about any of it. But on the right, they talk about it all the time. The government is planning, and they practice the mandate of shutting down faith communities with the pandemic so they can get ready to do it again. Now, this is deep conspiracy theory that's full of nonsense, but that's how they're talking about it. So at nearly every time someone gets together at a Christian nationalist thing, they talk about church shutdowns and church mandates. It happens over and over and over again. All right, I'm going to talk a little bit here about this 7 mountains theory, and then you're going to hear some from Rob. You're going to get a little song, and then we're going to give you a chance to respond, and then some thoughts about how we move forward out of this. The 7 mountains is super important in this new variant of Christian nationalism. Now, some people don't know anything about 7 mountains theory. They don't. If you say it to them, they're not going to understand it. But the great majority of organizers around it understand what it is, and here's what it basically suggests. Is that in 7 areas, God is going to raise up leaders all over the world, starting with the United States. Theory is that the United States and the nation of Israel are the only 2 nations in which were ever created by the inspiration of God rather than political movements. Okay, that's the story they tell. That's not true, but that's the story they tell. So Israel is the younger brother, the United States, or is the older brother, the United States is the younger, bigger brother, and the 2 of those nations chosen by God are going to lead the rest of the world. So we start in those places, and then borrowing the metaphor of Moses going up on the mountain and being the chosen one, there's not one mountain for the leader to go up to. There are 7 areas of influence called the 7 mountains. So they want leaders to have prominence in society, first in the United States and around the world, in arts and entertainment, business, education, family, government, media, and religion. Do you see why some of these people say Donald Trump is the chosen one? Media, politics, business, Trump University, hard to say with a straight face. So they're like, oh, significant leader, God has been raising these people up. There is massive work in every one of these arenas to do this. This is where it all comes from. So when I mentioned that Nathan and I went to one of the Michael Flynn's rallies, one of those events, this was in Octavia, New York, and I just happened to walk in. I was doing a bunch of recording there and interviewing people, and I just happened to walk in when the thing that I'm going to show you here was on the screen. This guy named Lance Warnow, who's a big leader in this area, was up front talking about how you decide who you're going to vote for as a Christian. And what he's basically going to say is this: the question is not, is the person a Christian or not? The question is, were they chosen by God? 7 mandates idea, right? Okay, so here it is.
Cyrus, whom I've anointed,
into the
doesn't even know the Lord.
Great Awakening.
Because all the Christians, if you ever talk to Christians during an election cycle, here's what they care about. Is he a Christian? Is he a Christian? They want to know if their candidate's a Christian. Is he a Christian? Let me tell you something. One of the worst presidents we ever had was Jimmy Carter, and he was a Christian. The question you should be asking isn't, is he a Christian? You should ask, is he anointed and chosen by God for the job? No, you're not getting a choir boy. But I'm telling you something prophetically. As I sat there, that anointing that was on Kim came upon me, and I was shook up.
So here's the thing. A lot of times these Christian nationalist preachers talk about a prophetic voice. That's a really important bit. And maybe it's hard to put all together, but he's saying that because he has a prophetic calling, prophetic voice, he will know how to determine if someone is chosen by God or not. And that's the thing, that when these Christian nationalists say we should only have leaders that are anointed by God, they typically mean their God, of course, and their understanding of God. So what they're doing is saying that the God of the universe has put someone who believes and thinks the way they do into a position of power, and therefore you can't argue against it. That's the heart of the Christian nationalist prophetic narrative.
All right. Another trigger warning. Pat Robertson was also big into this. In fact, Pat Robertson's the one who brought Donald Trump to prominence with Christian leaders. Oh, he was really hand-selected by Pat Robertson. Pat Robertson in this broadcast was talking about how the Trump administration was not helping the Christians in Syria. And he uses a phrase that I want you to hear, and then we'll talk just for a second or so.
However, is now allowing the Christians and the Kurds to be massacred by the Turks. And I believe, and I want to say this with great solemnity, the President of the United States is in danger of losing the mandate of heaven if he permits this to happen.
So this is the logic, that there's a mandate of heaven that Donald Trump was chosen. It could be taken from him if he doesn't behave the way that he should. So for Christian nationalists, this 7 mountains theory is that God is selecting people to be in particular positions of power to accomplish God's role in the world. This is why when you talk to this variant of Christian nationalism, which is the most alive, the ones that are all over, taking over school boards, and you say to them, yeah, but Thomas Jefferson wrote a letter to the Baptists in Virginia and said there should be a separation. They're just like, okay, that's got nothing to do with what we're up to. We're up to global evangelization through the power of the United States government. So when you're talking to your friends, if they're like, I'm not a Christian nationalist, just ask them if you think the United States should be utilized for the evangelization of the world and that all the systems, including the government, should be working toward that end. They tend to say yes to those kinds of statements, right? And then you can say, well, that's what I mean by a Christian nationalist, right? So you're talking definitionally. Like my 2 friends, if they were sitting here, they would say, yes, that's what I believe. And then we'd have a hearty discussion about, why I would suggest that they're wrong about that. All right, you're going to hear from Rob Ryerson. He's a pastor, travels with us, does our thing. We're just going to give a little testimony and to break up the voices for a little bit. And then Dan's going to serenade you with another song to sort of touch your heart. And then we're going to just talk briefly about how you can engage in ways that are full of empathy and all the rest. So,
thank you, Doug.
I'm Rob Ryersey. I spent 25 years as a pastor, live in Fayetteville, Arkansas, and I'm now the political director for Vote Common Good, and get to spend my time traveling around the country, and which I absolutely love to do. But I'll tell you the most difficult part about traveling around the country is not living in the bus. It's not eating lunch at the truck stops that we stop at or any of that. The most difficult part of being on the bus is being away from my family. Because I'm one of those people that's actually a big fan of my family. I like my wife, my kids. I've got 4 kids. My eldest is 24. I've got a 22-year-old, one who's going to be 20 in a couple of weeks, and then we have a 9-year-old. Yeah, we have the oh no, what have we done, baby. But I'll tell you, this past Christmas, we decided, just a couple months ago at Christmas time, we decided to help our 24-year-old out. They live in Chicago and went to the Art Institute, the school at the Art Institute of Chicago. Super proud, like really great artist. Matt, I'm so proud of you. You got into the most expensive art school in the country. Way to go. So proud of you. So we decided to help them get a car. And so for Christmas, we decided to buy a car for Matt, and that was going to be their Christmas present. So we bought Matt a Honda Element. You remember Honda Elements? They don't really make them anymore, I don't think, but it's basically the cardboard box was more like a metal box going down the street. Very boxy vehicle. Have you had this experience when you buy a car? Because we had this in the couple of days that we were hiding the Honda Element from Matt while they were home from Chicago before it was Christmas time. We had this experience where maybe you've had this where you're driving around, maybe you get a new car and you're driving around and all of a sudden you notice that car everywhere. You thought you were going to be special driving that car. Like, oh, I'm the only one who's driving a Honda Element now. And now I see Honda Elements everywhere. This Christian nationalism training might be a little bit like that. We're talking about ways that Christian nationalism shows up in politics, the way it shows up in government, things you might see on the news, things that you might experience, that you might hear from people. And certainly Christian nationalism shows up in all of those ways, but it shows up in other ways too. And when you begin to recognize it, it's something really to behold. One of the ways that Christian nationalism shows up sometimes is in voter guides that get handed out by churches. I ran for Congress in 2018 in Arkansas. That's a whole nother story that I don't have time to tell you. But I will tell you this little part of it. As a congressional candidate, I had the opportunity to respond to questionnaires that would provide answers for those voter guides that would get handed out in churches. Knowing that many of them are motivated by Christian nationalist organizations that want to push people a certain way, that have very black and white answers, that have no nuance at all, I just decided, I made the decision, I'm not going to answer any of these questionnaires. I'm just going to, choose not to participate in that. There was one organization, when I did not fill out their questionnaire, they put in the voter guide that got distributed in churches across Arkansas a little note that said, the candidate chose not to participate. Here's his phone number. And the phone number that they had was not a campaign phone number. It was the phone number that goes to this phone right here. And over a few weeks, I would get phone calls from people that would say, is this Rob Ryersey? They would never say Ryersey because no one can pronounce Ryersey. They would say, is this Rob Ryers? Are you running for Congress? I've got some questions for you. And typically they would say things like, I want to see if your beliefs are, if your policies, if you support a biblical worldview. But the idea that a church would influence the way people vote in a very specific way, those voter guides might just be an example of Christian nationalism showing up. I remember the time that it was one of my kids, I think it was the 19-year-old, was having their Christmas program, their winter holiday program, whatever, at school, public school, about a half mile from our house. Public school that we absolutely love, sent all of our kids there. Our youngest, the 9-year-old, is now there. We just absolutely love this school. I remember this Christmas program where the kids are singing Christmas songs and they're doing the whole thing. And then near the end, the music teacher, an employee of the school, which is funded by the government from all of our taxes, not just anybody, but the music teacher stood up and sang to this diverse group of people, sang the song "O Holy Night," which includes the line that everyone everywhere should bow on their knees to the baby who was born in Bethlehem. I'm not so sure that's what ought to be happening in a public school setting, an employee of a public school, but it's just a Christmas carol. Or maybe it's Christian nationalism. I'm so happy I don't have to. I'm going to give this example. I remember had a pastor friend who came and spoke to a group of pastors that I had organized, and he happened to be an immigrant from Ireland who had come to the United States to pastor. And in the midst of this, he said to this group of people, he just kind of mentioned in passing that it really ever since he's been in the United States, it boggles his mind that most churches in the United States have a United States flag in the sanctuary. And there was a man who happened to be a deacon at my church that was there who got into an argument with him about this because it's like, I'm a veteran and you are disrespecting me by saying, and because he questioned whether or not there should be an American flag in a place that is supposed to be, that could be open to all, that is connected to a body that is global and not national. Maybe it was seeing a bit of Christian nationalism. See, this stuff, it shows up in all sorts of different ways. It shows up in small things, and you begin to recognize it. I remember, and this will be the last one because it's kind of fun. I remember when I was in high school, and there used to be that trivia question of what's the longest word in the dictionary? Do you remember that? Does anybody know the answer? Anti-disestablishmentarianism. Fantastic. I'll tell you this, it's no longer the longest word in the dictionary. It's a little bit like Pluto no longer being a planet. They're like, nah, you're out of here. But anti-disestablishmentarianism, do you know what anti-disestablishmentarianism is? It's Christian nationalism. It's a word that came about in the 19th century in England when there was a group of people who wanted to disestablish the Church of England from the British government. And the anti-disestablishmentarianism was people who wanted to keep the Church of England and the government together. Anti-disestablishmentarianism is Christian nationalism. So you begin to notice these things. And so as we think about being Christian, being those who oppose Christian nationalism, but do it with empathy, we begin to recognize where it shows up so that we can then respond well. Now, another example of this is my friend Dan, who's going to come back up and sing a song that he wrote when he began to make some of these connections and recognize some of this stuff as well.
I remember the first time I felt like something was amiss. I was in a room much like this. It was a sanctuary that I grew up in, and beautiful stained glass. And at the front of the sanctuary, we had this huge 40-foot stained glass cross. And on the 4th of July, we would raise up this 40-foot American flag that would obstruct the cross. And something just didn't sit well with me with that imagery. It just seemed like we were a little too cozy. Church and state. And I think even when you're talking about, your preferred version of Christianity, Christian nationalism is bad for Christianity and it's bad for democracy. And I slowly learned that, and kind of wrote a song about my story and my experience, and maybe you'll find yourself in these words as well. I grew up in your churches, Sunday morning and evening service. I knelt in tears at the foot of the rugged cross. You taught me every life is sacred, feed the hungry and clothe the naked. I learned from you the highest law is love. And I believed you when you said that I should trust the words in red to guide my steps through a wicked world. I assumed you'd do the same, so imagine my dismay when I watched you lead the sheep straight to the wolves. You said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. You said to speak the truth, well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Oh, they started putting kids in cages, ripping mothers from their babies, and I looked to you to speak on their behalf. Oh, but all I heard was silence, or worse, you justified it, singing glory, hallelujah, raise the flag. See, your fear had turned to hatred, but you baptized it with language torn from the pages of the good book. You weaponized religion, and you wonder why I'm leaving to find Jesus on the wrong side of your walls. And you said to love the lost, well, I'm loving you now. said to speak the truth. Well, I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home, come home. You're better than this. Oh, you taught me better than this. Come home. Come home. Oh. Maybe I was too naive, or I just didn't want to see that there's always been a little poison in the well. Our churches sit on stolen land, a nation built by stolen hands, and we use the Bible to justify it all. Yeah, from slavery and segregation to mass deportations, this is who we are, but not who we have to be. There's a lot of work to do to pull up the evil by the roots, but repentance has to come before there's peace. You said to love the lost, I'm trying to love you now. You said to speak the truth, that's why I'm calling you out. Why don't you live the words that you put in my mouth? May love overcome and justice roll down. 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 Thank you.
If you wanted to look up that song, it's called The Hymn for the 81%, as a reference to the 81% of evangelicals that voted for Donald Trump. It's on YouTube, has 700 and some thousand views, so it's out there. We're going to let you go for lunch here in a minute, but I want to introduce Nathan. Nathan's going to give you a few thoughts about what they're doing at Faithful America. I'll just make this mention while Nathan comes up, that churches, you could see this whole conversation as a part of faith formation. We should start talking about what it means for us to be churches and help our people figure out how to live in a civic society of an open democracy. For people that are in churches and know that this is hard to do, I don't think this congregation particularly, but I know for a lot of churches, I've been a pastor for a long time, there's a lot of no-talk rules around politics and religion. And you know, if you have grandkids, you might know this reference. You just have to sometimes break the no-talk rules. And look, we can make it about faith and we can make it about goodness. But if we lose empathy, if we lose understanding, if we end up in just a political battle with other political battles, then we're giving up something that those of us who care about our faith can uniquely contribute. And that is, we can engage with other people around faith in ways that matter. So we encourage you with these considerations of faith engagement. And I'd encourage you to take curiosity as the way forward. Curiosity is the best way. To be curious with Christian nationalists that you know about what's going on, and then to share with them what you know and invite them to be curious about it. Most Christian nationalists I know don't know they have a problem. They think their view is the solution to a problem. So if you can help them be curious about why you think that the views that you hold are better for solving the problem of America than the solutions they have, that's an invitation as opposed to a debate. We get into a lot of conversations with a lot of people because we drive around in that bus and we do a lot of things and we move into spaces intentionally to engage. We know this. It doesn't work to try to change people's minds. Mind changing is going on all the time. The best we can do is join in where people's minds are starting to change. And the best way to get there is with empathy, engagement, and curiosity. So people are often frustrated. They're like, hey, we went to that thing, went to that seminar, and you didn't tell us what to do. I hope you know why. Because we don't have a problem. Problems have solutions. We have a predicament that requires multiple responses. So all of us have to find something to do. One of our mottos around Vote Common Good is, when you live in a time of social turmoil, you don't do nothing, you do something. And our encouragement to you is to find your something. And if you want a something with us, we'd love your email. We'd love for you to come with us. We'd love to travel around. If you want something with Faithful America, Nathan's going to invite you to that. So really appreciate you being here. Last words are going to go Nathan, including instructions about lunch, because Faithful America has picked up the tab on lunch. Is that true? Nathan, I know you wouldn't brag about that. They've picked up the tab. I mean, feeding your hearts, your minds, and your bellies around here. So don't forget to make a donation for any of that to Faithful America or Vote Common Good. Would be glad to consider you as part of it. All right, so Nathan, come give us the last word, if you would, my friend.
All right, thank you. We get a big round of applause for Doug, Rob, and Dan. Thank you. I want to be done by 1:15. I might just be a minute or two over, but I want to cover 3 final points here. I want to talk a little bit more about Christian nationalism itself and the people it hurts. Let's talk about the folks at the margins and bring them to the center the way Jesus did. And a bit more about the definition of Christian nationalism and how those loop together. Then I want to talk about the importance of showing up, kind of similar to what Doug was just saying, and close with a little bit about Faithful America. So, on that topic of white Christian nationalism, one of the questions we get asked the most is, why do you call it Christian nationalism when it's not Christian? You asked a similar question, why not put Christian in quotes? And there are a number of reasons we do that, and I'll tie this into the definition and then pivot from there to who this hurts. But first, when we hear white nationalism, we don't think that white nationalism is about being white. Why don't we put the word white in quotes? Why not just call it nationalism? I'm white and I don't adhere to that, you're insulting me. We know what it means to hear white nationalism. We know that means there are people who are nationalists who want a white nation. The word white doesn't mean it is white, it's just referring to the kind of nationalism they want to build. Similar for Christian nationalism, or in India, Hindu nationalism. Other forms of religious nationalism around the world. So it's pointing to the kind of nation they believe they want to build. But it's also pointing to which faith is getting twisted and hijacked, and thus which faith needs to respond. I've talked to a number of rabbis who say we should have multi-faith and interfaith events against Christian nationalism to center the voices like American Jews and Muslims who are affected, and that's true. I've also talked to a number of rabbis who say this is a Christian problem, and you as the Christians need to be the ones to respond. And they're both. Interfaith Alliance and Faith in Public Life are fantastic multi-faith groups doing work against Christian nationalism. Please check them out. And Sojourners and Vote Common Good and Faithful America and Christians Against Christian Nationalism are a Christian voice against Christian nationalism. Can't recommend any of them enough either. And so we take it on from both sides, but remind multi-faith and Christian, but remembering that it is Christian nationalism reminds us that we are the ones who need to speak up to reclaim our faith. The other reason we call it Christian nationalism, and this is what Doug got into a little bit too, we're not going to, I often say Christian nationalism is not Christian, but Christian nationalists are. Franklin Graham said of us at Faithful America that we are a so-called Christian group. He also wrote a book called Progressive Christianity Can Lead You to Hell. Newsweek covers us a lot, and anytime they cover our petitions, we had 2 stories last week, we get a flood of hate mail. And a lot of these emails will say, You're not Christians, you're liberals. Our faith is attacked all the time. I'll tell you a story. Tony Perkins had a forum, a town hall with Michelle Bachmann, and it was on the problem with the term Christian nationalism. Not the problem with Christian nationalism, the problem with the term Christian nationalism. This was in the 22 midterms. And they were going over their definitions of the term and all the liberal scholars who'd invented it and come up with it. And anytime they were critiquing the work of an atheist, so they really hammered that home. This guy's from the Freedom from Religion Foundation, not freedom of religion. This professor's an atheist. And anytime they were quoting Christian scholars, they just left that part out. Remember Amanda, our friend Amanda Tyler from Christians Against Christian Nationalism, they played a clip of her on CNN, but they cut off the chyron at the bottom so that you couldn't see the word Baptist or Christian. They just cropped it so that disappeared. They talked at length about our friend Dr. Jamar Tisby. I recommend his books, fantastic black scholar, historian of race and religion. And they never once mentioned that he runs Black Christian Collective and has founded different faith groups and that he is a Christian. They didn't lie. They didn't say he was an atheist. But they didn't mention his faith while hammering it home that the other side are atheists. That the other professors were atheists. So they intentionally scrub that out, right? It's all the godless liberals. Mike Flynn has said from the stage at Reawaken America that you're either a Christian nationalist or a godless globalist. It's one extreme or the other. We don't want to attack their faith that same way. We don't want an eye for an eye. It hurts. Now, I don't know Franklin Graham or Mike Flynn's heart. I don't know Donald Trump or Marjorie Taylor Greene's relationship to God, so I'm not going to question it. But more importantly, because we acknowledge that they are still Christian, it is as their siblings in Christ that we can say this is not what Jesus wants. Because we're not getting into a fight over who's the real Christian, no true Scotsman, right? I've run into liberal atheists who tune out when they start hearing that fight. No, these are Christians, you got to own it. And if you can't own it, you're just as bad as them, and I don't want anything to do with this. This is your problem, and you're not dealing with it. You're the same. We run into the biggest critiques, more from liberal atheists than from the religious right. And so we have to acknowledge that problem in our house and engage with our siblings in Christ. And it is as their siblings that we get to say, come home to faith, hope, and love. Yes, God loves you, but God wants us to love our neighbors too. And this is not what Jesus' love looks like. So by acknowledging that they are Christians too, even if their fruits of their word, even if their words and their actions are not Christian, they are. It's our problem to deal with. Now, you heard Amanda say that Christian nationalism is the way they define it and the way we define it. It's the merger of the religious and civic identities. That you can't be a good American without being a good Christian. You can't be a good Christian without being a good American. Let's name who that hurts. That is inherently anti-Semitic. That is inherently anti-Muslim. For all their talk of so-called Judeo-Christian values, the whole point is to cut out non-Christians. It is patriarchal. It is white. It is anti-black, and we'll talk about that for a quick second. But it is also anti-Christian. Because what does it mean to be a Christian nation? Which Christianity? Right? They are trying to erase us. And I find that interesting. There's this huge victim complex, right? We heard Michael Flynn saying they're trying to shut down our churches. And Doug started by talking about that county clerk in Kentucky years ago. Anytime they can't discriminate, I shouldn't be using us versus them language. I don't like to use that word they. But anytime folks who are part of this ideology cannot discriminate, they say they are being discriminated against. There's a massive victim complex, which I find interesting because they are the ones ultimately trying to erase the progressive and moderate and even never Trump conservative Christian voices, saying progressive Christianity can lead you to hell. But it's not just the Episcopalians and progressive Catholics and Methodists, Lutherans, Congregationalists that get erased. As our friend Dr. Tisby would say, it's the black church tradition too. And that leads to a related point. You often hear the phrase, white Christian nationalism. I've got it on our thing about Faithful America here. For love and justice against white Christian nationalism. What is the difference between white Christian nationalism and Christian nationalism? Why do I hear both terms in the news? Are they the same thing? Different groups, just as there are different definitions of Christian nationalism, there are different approaches to this. At Faithful America, we tend to say that white Christian nationalism is the largest subset of Christian nationalism. At Christians Against Christian Nationalism, they say Christian nationalism gives cover to and propagates white supremacy. And Dr. Tisby would say you can never leave the white out of white Christian nationalism. Say the white part out loud. And it's confusing because we saw videos just now, especially from Latina pastors, but a few black pastors too. White Christian nationalism, we've just been talking about how there's so many different expressions of Christianity. The theologies that white Christian nationalism espouses tend to be pulled from white theologians and white communities exclusively. They are not rooted in the theologies or the traditions of liberation and slave theology that you hear in black churches. They erase all of those theologies. They will welcome anyone who will subscribe to their theologies and their political ideology above all, black, brown, white, but you have to fit their white norms. And there are more and more outreach to Latina churches in particular. So they are working on that. But it's a bit like, 2 points about that. It's a bit like watching the Republican National Convention. You see all these black speakers, but then the cameras turn around to the audience, and it's very white. So if you go to the Reawaken America tour, Mike Flynn's deal, it's the same thing. A third of the lineup is people of color, but the audience is very white. And so I've asked Dr. Tisby before, as a white person, I'm not going to call a black pastor a white nationalist, how to handle this. And Dr. Tisby points out, look to the black and brown communities, look to the black church tradition, look to Latina churches. Who are the leaders there? What do they say? And even if we look at the polling that Doug briefly put up on screen from Pew and PRRI and others, overwhelmingly, these ideologies are more common among white Protestants and white evangelicals than any other race. Now, I talk about Christian nationalism more than white Christian nationalism because it is also patriarchal. It harms women deeply, and it is rooted in the power of men. And it is anti-Semitic, and it is anti-Muslim. Speaker Johnson might be the most Christian nationalist politician we've ever had. The other day, he invited a guest chaplain to give the prayer in the House chamber, a guy by the name of Pastor Jack Hibbs. And Pastor Hibbs has said that Muslims are a death cult doing Satan's work, and that the true Jews believe in Jesus Christ, and all the Jews who don't believe in Jesus are walking around in a blind stupor. And that's the man, he's also back January 6th and said the election is stolen, and that's the man, your Speaker of the House, wants opening the House in prayer. So inherently anti-Muslim, inherently anti-Semitic, not just about giving rights to Christians, but taking them away from others. So we will talk about white Christian nationalism at times, but we don't want to lose sight of all the different communities it hurts. We need power. Democracy, you're trying to win elections. But we want to use power to build up everyone, whether they share our faith or not. It's about making sure everyone can participate in democracy, that everyone has freedom, not just those like us. And that's the key difference in how we can put our faith in action. It's not just for our fellow Christians. So I'll be brief on my next two things. That leads me first, so point two, let's talk about showing up. I have a 4-year-old daughter, and she's a handful, and I haven't slept in 4 years, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. That kid is my life. I've only been on the road for 3 days, and I miss her dearly. She would rather spend 10 or 20 minutes playing Finger Man with me and Mama. You know, just, this Finger Man, this is Finger Woman, they have kids. 10 minutes with us playing Finger Man, then sit for an hour with her 100 stuffies and 2 dollhouses alone. She wants us to be present. She just wants that presence. And we don't have to get it right. We just have to be with her. And I know the days are ending when she's going to grab my hand. Daddy, play with me, play with me. So when she grabs my hand, I just let her pull me. You've got to show up. When I was home in college for a summer, someone in our church passed away. And I didn't know him very well, but I knew his wife really well. Fran was a big leader in the youth group. I was tired. I was cranky. I didn't know George. I didn't yet understand the funerals are for the living. And I didn't go. And when Dad got home, he said, Fran asked where you were. All you have to do is show up and people notice. So I'm going to come back to that. Every 4 years, every time we have a big election, political strategists have the same debate. What wins an election? Is it turnout? Is it mobilization? Is it getting your supporters to the polls? Or is it persuasion? Is it convincing folks to vote for your guy or gal? The answer is it's both. A good turnout operation can increase your turnout by 3%. A good field campaign, you can get 3% more voters. Persuasion, you're probably only going to convince 3 to 5% of folks to switch their vote. You know, our opinions are pretty baked in. But when elections are decided by less than 1%, both those things matter greatly. So one of the biggest questions we get is, how do I talk to the Christian nationalists in my life? And Doug alluded to this at the end. It's empathy. You keep the relationship. You don't throw facts and figures. That just makes a person feel like they were debated. We listen to each other. We don't throw scripture at each other. We just say, well, why do you care about that? Hey, I care about that too. You're doing this for family. I'm doing this for family. It leads me to a different place. But the work I tend to focus on is less that persuasion, less how to talk to those folks with those views, and more getting progressive Christians and moderate Christians and never Trump conservative Christians of all different stripes to show up. We need to do more, and we need to do it in Jesus' name. But we need to do it in love. You know, when we proclaim that we are doing this for Jesus, I'm not telling you, I think you need to believe in Jesus. I'm telling you who I am and what my motivation is. Are you doing this because you're Muslim? That's awesome. Tell me about it. Let's both share. Let's both celebrate that. Now, progressive Christians do get involved. Social justice Christians do get involved just as much as members of the religious right. But they do it through Move On, through the Democratic Party, through the Red Cross, through wonderful things. But we tend not to do it in Jesus' name. We need to start doing it in Jesus' name. Yes, persuasion matters, but you know what? When you see the Christian nationalist crowd showing up at school board meetings and screaming about groomers and CRT and winning, banning books, banning medical procedures that women and trans folks and other communities need, they're not trying to persuade liberals with that behavior, with that activism. They're trying to pass their agenda in Jesus' hijacked name. So we need to do the same thing, but it's an agenda that helps everyone, not an agenda that pushes our theocracy on everyone. Now, there is a separation of church and state, and I honor that, but church and state is not the same thing as faith and politics. The church and the state should not tell each other what to do, but we can still be involved. We can still say from our pulpits, when Donald Trump holds a Bible outside a church, or Marjorie Taylor Greene says you're either a godless atheist or a Christian nationalist like me, the church doesn't have to stay silent about God just because, you know, when the politicians talk about God. We can say that does not speak for us. We can say they have a right to their belief, but please understand that is not what the church teaches about God. When they do family separation in God's name, when they push migrants back into the Rio Grande in God's name, the church can say that is not what God wants. We can't tell you who to vote for, we won't tell you who to vote for, but we need to speak up more about the hijacking of God's name. And I'd love to see churches publish in the bulletins, when are the school board meetings? We're not going to go scream at people. We're not going to go yell. We're not going to cause fights over vaccines and masks in the parking lot. But we are going to go say, as a parent, it would really help me. As a Christian parent, it would really help me if there were pro-LGBTQ books in the school library. Not sexual ones, but ones that simply show families different than mine, the same way you have ones that show families like mine. My kid needs that, and I need help teaching my kid that. That's what I need as a Christian parent. We can start going to more school board meetings and county council meetings and saying things like that, not through the Democratic Party, not through Move On, but in Jesus' name. Just show up, and you don't have to get it right. You don't have to master the issues and spend hours. My kid doesn't need me to know all this child psychology before I play with her. Just show up. That's what they're doing, and it's working. Just show up. So I'm going to very briefly tell you about Faithful America, and then I'm going to let you get lunch. Faithful America is the largest online community of Christians taking action for love and social justice, and now against Christian nationalism. We were founded in 2004 by the National Council of Churches. Our work kind of falls into 4 buckets, and I hope you'll join some of this. You probably know us if you're on the email list for our petitions, and that's what we've been doing for a long time. Petitions, and then all the digital tools that follow. Take a call alert, call the petition target, take action on social media. Maybe we'll have a webinar. We're trying to do more and more webinars. We had Rob Reiner last month. He did a movie called God and Country that Doug is in. So all the standard digital campaign tactics, we do deliver those petitions, sometimes in person, sometimes via email, and they make a difference, especially when it's corporate campaigning. We got DirecTV to get several televangelist networks to drop Jim Baker when he was selling COVID snake oil. Just a few months ago, Fisher-Price changed their little people nativity set. It had a blonde-haired, blue-eyed baby Jesus and a white Holy Family, and they have mixed that up. It's now much more racially ambiguous, but certainly the white Jesus is gone. And that's because of the 200,000 Faithful America members who put their faith into action online. So we hope you'll sign these petitions at Faithful America and take action with us. It does make a difference. We've been chasing Mike Flynn around the country, just like we're going to have if you're clergy, please stick around for the anti-Franklin Graham press conference. We'd love to have you quite possibly likely speak in front of our billboard and bus at 3 o'clock. And we've been doing those press conferences against Mike Flynn everywhere he goes, and it matters because the local news almost always covers Mike Flynn. But when we speak out, it isn't just Mike Flynn coverage. It's look what the Christians had to say about those 20 pastors defending January 6th and attacking vaccines in Jesus' name. It's Mike Flynn when he's up there spouting his conspiracy theories in God's name, mixing that with baptisms. There's a Christian response. And we get 50% of the local press coverage. So Faithful America is organizing pastors and our Christian members across the country to do that work. Every year, we name names. I will never get confrontational with the friends. I've got those friends from high school too, but we do get confrontational with the Franklin Grahams, the Donald Trumps. We put out a list every year called False Prophets Don't Speak for Me, and we identify top false prophets of Christian nationalism. The goal being that you need to get in the news stories about them. It's not enough to have news stories about yourself because different people read different stories and they don't see the response. And they still say, where is the church? And if you don't name what violates your values, like we're going to do with Franklin Graham here, the other side can very easily say, well, those are our values too. We have to show what the values look like in action and what breaking them looks like in action. So that's what Faithful America does. And I'm really excited about our next project, launching in a month or two. We're going to try and go deeper. We're going to try and start building local digital cohorts, putting people together. We'll probably start with 6 or 7 locations. I'm guessing Arizona and maybe specifically Tucson will be one of them. So that people can meet like-minded social justice Christians and have community. I think we're all yearning for community. I think we were before the pandemic, but even more so now. So let's get together, have book groups online, coffee online, and let's turn that to organizing. So these online cohorts will build community with each other, but also know what's happening where they are and work with us to respond. And I think Arizona will be one of them. We'll know in a few weeks. So please, faithfulamerica.org, you can sign a petition on the homepage. You can sign one against that House Speaker chaplain I just mentioned. We've got one right at the homepage. We launched a new one today, Defending Annunciation House, the pro-immigrant Catholic service in Texas. You can sign that. Or you can just put your name on the clipboard in the back and take a water bottle. And I'm going to end it there just to say that where Christian nationalism preaches hate, Jesus preaches love. Where Christian nationalism preaches anti-vaccine conspiracy theories and stop the steal lies, Jesus says the truth shall set you free. And where Christian nationalism gives us not only January 6th, but attacks on FBI field offices, street violence, the Proud Boys, Jesus is our Prince of Peace. And so for all the talk we've had today about the bad stuff, I'm so glad to see this crowd here today for love, for peace, for truth, and for dignity and equality and welcome for all, no exceptions. So give yourselves a round of applause. But thank you, thank you, thank you.